Federal authorities have charged 47 people,
stealing more than $250 million meant for needy children.
The largest fraud scheme yet to take advantage of COVID relief funds.
And then using that money to line their own pockets.
Federal prosecutors announced charges against nearly 47 people who are in connection with a big COVID-related fraud scheme. Allegedly exploited a federally funded program devoted to child nutrition. But before you learn about a big COVID-related fraud scheme, pay attention to the big red subscription button. As soon as you click it, you will be taken to the wealthy side, the life you deserve, where you'll find hundreds of videos. These videos contain the answers to almost any question you may have. There are also daily updates, so if you want to stay tuned, remember to turn on notifications. This news breaks the internet because of its high intensity and its association with COVID-19. In today's video, we will look deeply into the matter, so stay tuned until the end. Well, 47 people were charged for being in the huge fraud of the scheme called Feeding Our Future. The authorities claim that it was a massive scam that was intended to do a big fraud with the government of over $250 million under the guise of feeding children in need during the pandemic.
The indictment in this case alleges the defendants took money that was set aside to feed hungry children and instead fed their own greed.
More importantly, Minnesota has never seen such an accumulating amount of charges in a federal fraud case, and there is no doubt that it is a massive case of fraud. In a news conference, Andrew Luger, U.S. Attorney, announced and revealed this huge fraud case associated with COVID-19 on Tuesday, September 20, 2022. And on that day, 6 indictments were revealed that describe the alleged crimes. It includes money laundering, bribery, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. And 3 of them associated with the scheme were being charged for the felony information. Also, the executive director of the scheme, Amy Bach, was indicted with 47 people. Well, this scheme operates as the sponsor to sites that receive federal dollars to feed needy children. All 3 indictments focused on this issue throughout the investigation proceedings this month. Moreover, Feeding Our Future promoted the schemes, which were said to be worth around $40 million and were carried out by every group. That is based on false claims to provide food to millions of children during the pandemic. In total, the conspirators were paid about $125 million through the child nutrition program operated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which, in reality, they didn't provide. In addition, they are accused of submitting fake invoices and fake documents that purported to prove their food purchases, as well as feigned invoices claiming to serve children meals at their sites. But some of them did purchase and presented a small amount of food, that too with exaggerated numbers to get benefits. The indictment also states that the sites also submitted fake attendance rosters that listed the names and ages of every child and claimed that the children are receiving their meals daily. Conspirators used formulas to alter roster spreadsheets by inserting a random age between 7 and 17 on the rosters, which contained fake names culled from different websites, some of them allegedly culled from a website known as www.listofrandomnames.com. Ultimately, according to one indictment, they show the output in different ages appearing next to children's names on each invoice. However, this scheme was an approved sponsor under the Federal Child Nutrition Program, and Bach was responsible for supporting and recruiting federal food aid sites under the sponsorship of her organization.
The scheme that began with a simple idea in March of 2020 grew to become the largest pandemic fraud in the United States. They were running a scheme, not a child nutrition program. Only about 1 or 2% of the names in most of these sites matched the school rosters. These children were simply invented. Their goal was to make as much money for themselves as they could, while falsely claiming to feed children during the pandemic.
The rest of Feeding Our Future's employees were charged, and the indictments also accused this scheme of taking kickbacks and bribes from people who are interested in involvement with the scheme. Bach was indicted with her employee named Abdikerm Abdullahi Eidle. During the pandemic, the scheme also allegedly took advantage of changes in the federal child nutrition program, which was designed to ensure children in need could get adequate nutrition. USDA permitted for-profit restaurants to participate in the federal food program and distribute food off-site to children not enrolled in the program related to education. Prosecutors said the teleworking policies and stay-at-home orders make monitoring the food aid program more difficult, which increases the possibility of abuse and fraud. Earlier this year, Bach said in an interview with Star Tribune that she had never stolen money, nor had she seen any evidence of fraud among her subordinates. Well, the indictment repeatedly states that this massive scheme opened its own federal food aid sites in Burnsville and Minneapolis. That is allegedly based on false claims of providing meals to thousands of children on a regular basis.
The subjects in this case weren't interested in feeding our future. They were interested in feeding their own gluttony.
A quick reminder, if you've enjoyed the video so far, consider subscribing, as we frequently upload such informative and educational videos. Let's continue. Additionally, according to the charges, Bach and her company had recruited people and several other entities intending to open over 200 federal food program sites across Minnesota. The indictment reads, the sites fraudulently claimed to be serving meals to thousands of children a day within just days or weeks of being formed, and despite having few, if any, staff and little to no experience serving this volume of meals. According to one indictment, rather than feeding children, the defendants took advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting program changes to enrich themselves by fraudulently misappropriating millions of dollars in federal child nutrition program funds.
They lied, they prepared up their scheme, they papered up their scheme with false documents. The fraud scheme was brazen. The defendants stole money that was intended to feed hungry children during a pandemic, in some cases creating children from whole cloth.
The fraudsters are also accused of utilizing millions of dollars for international travel and buying luxury cars. Along with that, buying new homes, not just in Ohio, Minnesota, and Kentucky, but also across the coasts of Turkey and Kenya. And to hide the reality of the payments and make them look legitimate, the employees of this scheme have created shell companies to get several kickbacks that are paid in cash or in the name of consulting fees. Indicted along with Bach are three men who operate the Safari restaurant in Minneapolis: Abdirahman Mohammed Ahmed, Abdul Qadir Nul Salah, and Salim Ahmed Saeed, according to the 58-page, 60-count of the indictment charges. Based on the fake attendance rosters, they claimed that they served 3.9 million meals to children from April 2020 to November 2021. The overall indictment also alleges that Feeding Our Future defrauded and distributed over $240 million in the name of federal child nutrition program funds during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also grabbed about $18 million in administrative fees to sponsor sites in 2021. In the meantime, Bach, Idle, and other employees of the scheme are accused of taking bribes, kickbacks, and soliciting from individuals and companies sponsored by the organization of Bach. It sets up what prosecutors called a pay-to-play scheme. Moreover, the fraud scheme has drastically increased the number of its sites and also the amount received from the federal food aid funds under its sponsorship from the year 2019 to 2021. During that period, the company goes from receiving and dispersing around $3.4 million to around $200 million, which is insane. The charges also state that the restaurant received over $16 million in federal money based on their claims that they are going to provide food to needy children. The members, Salah and Saeed, sent most of the money to co-conspirators through shell companies that were used in the process of money laundering. As a result, the ownership of Safari Restaurant paid over $350,000 in kickbacks and bribes to Idle and Bach for providing the sponsorship. On the whole, Idle was accused of depositing over $5 million worth of fraud proceedings, bribes, and kickbacks in the bank account which was opened in the name of shell companies. The officials from the Minnesota Department of Education began raising questions about the sudden growth of the organization's sites in the year 2020. In response, following the withholding of payments since the start of 2021, Feeding Our Future has sued the state, claiming the Education Department is discriminatory against a nonprofit organization that is serving racial minorities. As a result of state education officials providing information to the FBI began an investigation into Feeding Our Future in May 2021. A federal investigation caused the nonprofit's bank accounts to be frozen, which led its board of directors to vote to dissolve the organization in part in February. She alleged that the Minnesota Education Department gave the feds a false case to derail her trial against the state scheduled for April. Several bank accounts belonging to Feeding Our Future and a personal bank account belonging to Bach with over $185,000 have been seized by the government for over $3.5 million, according to the court's document. Also, a search warrant operation at Bach's home on January 20 resulted in authorities taking $13,462 in cash and a 2013 Porsche Panamera. According to prosecutors, approximately $50 million has been seized in connection with the scheme. In addition to that, Tuesday's arrests also mark the latest high-profile chapter in a federal investigation. The investigation, which began more than a year ago and included a broader FBI operation in January, has become increasingly public. So, there is no doubt that this was a massive scam, and it becomes more important due to its relationship with the pandemic. Lugar also said in his press conference that their goal was to make as much money for themselves as they could while falsely claiming to feed children during the pandemic. And, as alleged in these indictments, over a short period, these 47 defendants engaged in a brazen scheme of staggering proportions. But according to Mitchell Hamlin School of Law professor emeritus Joseph Daly, federal authorities assembled a compelling case. But such cases, with so many defendants, can be quite complex. All of these people are charged with very, very, very serious crimes that can get them in prison for quite a long time. Well, these cases are not easy to prove. However, prosecutors have done a remarkable job by making a strong indictment. Michael Paul, who is a special agent in charge of the FBI's Minneapolis field office, said that the suspects have no interest in feeding our future in this case. Instead, their only goal was to feed themselves. Responding to a question in the news conference, U.S. Attorney Lugar also said that some of the defendants have already left the country. Regardless of its intensity, the arrests and the charges might help in stopping this fraud in the future. As the Minnesota Education Department said in a statement that these charges are going to help in protecting the integrity of these crucial programs and will also encourage the programs to continue feeding children and families in need. Let us know your thoughts on this in the comments section. Did you enjoy the video? Please hit the subscribe button, like, share, and comment.